Ron Daniels. I want to thank the film. That's the first time I've seen that film. It's Nation Time. I know I first heard about Gary when I was working with the Republic of New Africa, and Mario Bedelli would always talk about the Gary Convention and the RNA unveiling its anti-depression program. We always said it was adopted by the Gary Convention. I'm not sure it was or not, but one central feature of that platform was reparations. And we saw Queen Mother more than, oh my goodness, for those who don't know, Queen Mother Dorothy Lewis just made her transition this morning. Normally announced that. But, you know, Queen Mother Moore, I mean, she was there. But I'm just curious, she was filmed basically in the lobby or, did she have a formal role with respect to on the platform speaking? And were there workshops also that might have dealt with reparations or COINTELPRO? Maybe COINTELPRO might not have, was just being known at that time. Political prisoners, a lot of people were imprisoned and, not there. Were any of those issues part of this convention as well? I'm just curious.
Lucy or
I don't remember her. I remember her presence. She was a significant part of the New York delegation. I think that she may have spoken in the context of the convention itself, but she was a prominent member of the New York delegation. And I remember her well from prior. I knew her prior to Gary and knew her in New York after Gary, but she was a very prominent member of the New York delegation.
and Mr. Harris?
And let me just say this, and I would have said this in my opening, and I just yielded on that so we could get to the panel discussion more quickly. It was not organized around workshops. It was organized around delegations. So delegations meant to talk about input into the agenda and then how they would vote. It was very much like a Democratic or Republican or a political convention in that sense. Those kinds of issues were raised, reparations and so forth were raised earlier in the congressional meetings and the state meetings, and then they filled it up into this document, which is the National Black Political Agenda.
Why did the Michigan contingency walk out?
Labor.
Excuse me?
Labor.
Oh, labor?
Labor, the Michigan delegation, under the leadership of Coleman Young, got upset because of some of the postures that were being taken by some of my more nationalist brethren, who they interpreted that the Michigan folks were too pro-labor. And Coleman was a UAW guy, and Coleman said, I'm not going to sit up here and take this mess. Labor is an important ingredient in the African-American community in my state and city. I mean, UAW, he was a UAW member, and there was an assault that surfaced up in the dialogue around black folks in labor. And Coleman said, wait a minute, hold on. I think we need to have a conversation about this. And so that was a pullback by the Michigan delegation to have the conversation within themselves on how they were going to respond to the issues that had been raised by organized labor. But he was an organized labor guy. He wasn't going for the yoke-doke on that.
And then Jabari.
Hi, I'm Kinaya Shikoy. I am on the board of IBW, but I also am the CEO of a community action program in Anne Arundel County, Maryland. I was around during this time in terms of being an activist and all these other things that you're talking about. And my recollection is, let me say before I say that, if we can get a copy of It's Nation Time, I would really appreciate getting some information on how to get that copy. Now, what I was going to say is my recollection of the convention in Gary is it emanated out of the Congress of African People. Congress of African People convened in 1970, and we had 7 institutional areas. We were about nation time, nation building. And in terms of the education, we were talking about building our own schools. We had the engineers organized. We had the religion, the spiritual community organized, and Baraka was the head of the political work group, if you will, and as such, he became very instrumental in pulling together that convention along with a lot of other people, because one of the theories or feelings or philosophy coming out of the Congress of African People is that we were not all going to agree on the path to take. But again, we needed to have unity without uniformity. So that is my recollection of it. I did not attend that, but I was part of the folks in the field, on the ground, who were organizing for that particular event. That's one thing I just want to say. The other thing is I just wanted to make a comment on a discussion that went on here at the panel, that we seem to have gotten into a generational debate. And I think that, I'm sorry, I don't know your name, but her points are so well taken that we need to, across the generations, have this discussion without those of us who have been out there feeling a little bit defensive, because you know the nature of young people is to be in your face. And when we were doing our thing back in the 70s, 60s, we were in their face. So we need to be ready for that, young people need to understand that we've gone through some struggle. There needs to be some respect and recognized wisdom. And then finally, as those of us who are elders, we need to know that we need to be, that it needs to be due. In other words, we need to actually be worthy of that respect. We have to walk the walk and not, you know, talk one way and then walk another.
Thank you.
Let me say something right quick about the generational thing, because I'm a college president. I deal with the 18 to 24-year-old group literally daily. They do have a tendency to be in your face, but I insist on respect. And when people who are not badly treated talk about they're not treated well because they're young, I reject that. All of us have sat at the feet, as E-Face said, of many others, of Dr. Dorothy Irene Height. Dr. Height was 98 when she passed. She could pick up the phone and call me and tell me what to do. She wouldn't say hello or goodbye. It would be, this is what I need. I've got a student who needs to come to Bennett. Can you take care of that for me? Click. And you know what I did? I immediately got to my admissions people and said, Dr. Height said we have to let this sister in, so let's just do it. She could call Cora Berry, Alexis Herman, all of us distinguished women, but women who respected her because of her contribution and because of her age. And that's the respect that I think that young people do to us, and I just insist on it.
See, now you all have had y'all.
That's right.
Y'all have had all day.
Let's talk. Let's talk.
All right, briefly, and let's keep your comments as concise as possible. We're running out of time.
I want to deal with the issue of political identification, because I think that basically has been the key impediment of black people doing anything in a unified manner. More black people identify themselves with either party affiliation or some kind of organizational affiliation they do with blackness. They are more black, they are more Democrat than they are black. They're more Republican than they are black, okay? And that's clear because the Black Caucus doesn't do anything for black people in that sense, and you know, to the detriment of the majority of black people. Give you an example. One of the things the sister was talking about running for mayor. I worked on the Lenore Fulani campaign in 1988. First time I ever put my foot on the ground and actually worked for a campaign. That was in 1988. And unbeknownst to most people, Shirley Chisholm didn't run for president. No other black person ran for president. They merely ran for the Democratic nomination. Jesse Jackson didn't run for president in 1984. He ran for the Democratic nomination. He lost. He was told to run independent. He was told to not go through the political party. Lenore Fulani, based in New York, was part of the group that said, if Jesse ain't going to do it, I'm going to do it. She ran and got on the ballot in every 50 states. 50 states. I was the Baltimore coordinator for her campaign, okay? The thing was, and this is what I learned in 1988, that really blew my mind. That black people cared more about your party affiliation, like the sister was saying, than they cared about the issues you were espousing, okay? And this blew my mind, you know, at the time. And this issue has never been confronted, and has never been put on the table. Why are you more worried about the Democratic Party or this party or that group than you are on the holistic benefit of all black people? Now, the thing is
there a response opportunity?
Because it gets to this issue, because I have been in many types of situations where if you're not associated with something and you have a good idea and you're willing to put energy and lay out a whole plan, the issue isn't your idea, the issue is you. Okay, the issue is who you're affiliated with, who you're loyal to, and this is an impediment for black people because you gotta let the merit of things be the ruling basis and not affiliation.
All right, thank you, Jabari. Time for absolutely 2 minutes.
No.
I'm going to do is.
This is one film. On 72, there were 3 films done. Watch Back, Save the Children. Jesse was involved in Save the Children. I worked on Save the Children. I was on the outside doing the film for 51st State. These are very important films. You need to be trying to find out from where these other 2 films are. Watch Back is commercial, but Jesse has Save the Children. This is mostly musical film. Jackson 5. It was done in a 3-day thing. Very important film. And so that's the other film. Save the Children. Jesse, push. Push.
Save the Children.
Yeah. And Watch That, which is commercial, with Isaac Hayes, shout out to California, I worked on that one. And then I was outside, freezing, because my gig for 51st State, NET, was to do we did a film of what the people of Gary thought about the people being there. And it was for Artie Ivy. Artie Ivy was the producer director. It was NET then, pre-PBS. Okay, so those are 3 films, I'm bringing that. And the thing is that look at the energy that was in the room. It wasn't about a workshop or technical notes and stuff. There was a lot of stuff going on. People, we walked out of meetings all the time. That wasn't nothing new for the Michigan delegation to walk out. That was not new. That's why the guy got up and said they didn't all leave. They didn't all leave. But the fact that it happened, think about it. The fact that it happened for 3 days, there were no fights. There were no police out there at all. There were no police. And so think about that as opposed to getting down to nuts and bolts and blacks and youth. You know, I wonder whether or not we could do that today.
Maybe we can get a film festival with those.
Get those films there. I got a few. But I'm telling you that those films had so much information because 51st State, what we did was we wound up endings with a question mark. We had a question mark. Because our 2 films was what the Gary people thought, and we had a crew inside. And the narration at the end was, where do we go? Nobody knew where they were going to go from there.
Okay, well, hopefully we can get some more information about these films and bring it together for everyone's edification. They should be more widely distributed.
Maybe Mr. Harrison has already answered it, but who was the person who spoke in opposition at the convention? Maybe you've already answered that. The person, I don't know.
Opposition to what?
I guess, to the, it was opposition at the convention I guess, it dealt with Michigan, but I saw him speaking, and I couldn't see whether I was.
The mayor.
That was Coleman.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
One final question.
Who involved?
He was the mayor, then he became mayor.
He became mayor.
Let me intervene on this. Because this, excuse me, Gary, was a profound influence on my life. It shaped, if you see my writing, you see Gary all over.
Yep.
Because it was a profound piece. So I know Gary. I may not know all of it, but I know a lot about it. First of all, it didn't stop there. There was, as Julianne mentioned, a national black political assembly came out. We didn't get the black party. The compromise was that we would have a national black political assembly, which eventually emerged into the National Black Independent Political Party. So I just want to state that. there were two fundamental issues that created consternation in the Gary Convention. First of all, to adopt this, I mean, this was the most remarkable process that I have ever seen and since. In a way, it was like the Million Man March. The Million Man March was not supposed to happen.
Right, that's right.
Bill Lucy referred to it. There are times, and I say this, when things are in the air, there's something staring, but if you tap into it at the right time, it just explodes and happens. If you draw up the Million Man March in terms of how an organizer would organize it, you say this is impossible. You say it's impossible, but it happened at the right time, right? The right season. Gary was the same thing. This happened in, what, 6 months?
Wow.
6 months. And here's what happened. We had meetings were organized in every congressional district across this country. And people debated, they discussed, and they adopted their agendas. And they input it into a national platform. And it went from congressional district to the states, and from the states to the national. And Ron Walters, Fauntleroy, and so forth were part of this platform committee. Am I right? Okay. Now, here's the difficulty. We met from the 10th through the 12th. So now you're trying to adopt this agenda in really a couple of days. Point by point, everything is in there.
War by war.
That's right.
You know, and all of this has come with this very diverse group of people, right? Now, there were two issues which were explosive, given the tension between the different ideological forces. One was community control of education. Because organizations like the NACP, the Urban League, and so forth, I mean, they're still pushing, and I'm not saying this is right or wrong, an integrationist, desegregation, busing agenda. Out of New York was coming a very powerful new direction saying community control of education. Les Campbell, now G2EUC, there's a whole bunch of names there that we could associate. Powerful movement coming out of, largely driven by the Congress of Racial Equality under Roy Anderson, those things. That was a powerful force. The reality is, from my perspective, the convention was far more radical than much of the leadership was.
Yes.
It was much more nationalist, given the fact that black power had exploded onto the scene, black consciousness had exploded. And so people said, right on, we don't care about this Plessy versus Ferguson analysis. We want black schools to be controlled by black people in the black community. That resolution was one which did not sit well with the NACP, the Urban League, and even people in labor, because it was come from a kind of, it sounded like for some people a kind of separatist agenda.
Right.
The other more explosive issue was we had the audacity in that document to call for the return of Palestine to the Palestinian people. That resolution, we didn't say, I'm telling you, by the next morning, people were on the national, people headed for the turnstile, apologizing, saying, wow, oh my God, given, and this is legitimate, by the way. I'm not saying this is, given the legitimate, long-standing relationship between blacks and Jews. Not negative relationships, positive relationships with Jews that have been supportive and so forth. And then all of a sudden, you're saying return, Israel back to the Palestinians. That was a part of these resolutions that were there, right? So in the impasse about how to get this done, people were amending and adjusting and so forth. There was no way we could get through this whole thing if we were going to do the traditional process. In the middle of that, a gentleman out of New York named Waldemar Stewart said, Mr. Chairman, I move that the composite resolutions, meaning this agenda, that this composite resolutions as presented to the committee be adopted. And that was a way of saying, wait a minute, all this, let's not have any amendments. The whole thing, let's just adopt it whole hog. That was what's on. And so some people, including Michigan, would say, no, because they recognize some of the implications of what that was going to mean. But at the end of the day, and the voice that said, because Michigan did not all walk out. In fact, it was very interesting. I was on the radio today, guest hosting for Warren Ballantyne, and who should call in but a brother named Ed Vaughn from Detroit, former state representative, and so forth. And he reminded us, and I knew that they did, because my voice was the one that said Michigan did not all walk out. That ignited this thing about this nation time, because the whole convention was so electrified because they really wanted to have that unity at that moment. So that resolution passed. But the tension, in part, was because of these two issues which in fact would continue to plague the convention to some extent. And in fact, right after that, we went to North Carolina and we modified. There was so much heat and so much pressure on the Israel resolution that we modified it to a two-state resolution. The Palestinians will have a homeland, and the Jews will have a homeland as well.
And where are we now?
But by the way, and even that modification, hear me now, even that modification for them was extremely rapid. But indeed, what we come today is to adopt actually the two-state solution. I'm sorry, I just had to intervene.
No,
So
that's good. Very good. Very good.
Hi, I'm Jacqueline Taylor with the Tri-City Youth Service. I've enjoyed this discussion. I'd like to look post Gary. Where do we go from now? What are some of the solutions that you see, or what needs to be done now to impact change? I'd like to hear from the panelists.
Emerge ourselves in the re-election of the president that's
There
in the
you
White
go.
House. Here.
I don't agree with that.
I would say focus on the economic issues in our communities. I would encourage President Obama to, since that happened, they talked about the middle class. There's a middle class task force that's headed by Vice President Biden, but there's nothing that focuses on poverty, near poverty, or extreme poverty. A White House conference on poverty would be one way of galvanizing people to eliminate poverty. We also have to look at, again, what's happened with our banks that are exploiting people, the way, the basic topography of the inner city, which does not allow us to have the same kind of savings opportunities that others do. I mean, for example, you don't see a Costco in the hood, you know, but people in the suburbs don't need to save all their money. People in the city need to save a lot of money. So, I mean, I won't say they don't need to save money, but you know what I mean. But we have to figure out ways to attract great economic opportunities in our inner cities. There are dollars to do that, but oftentimes, they're federal dollars to help with that. Oftentimes, our cities are not sophisticated enough in attracting those dollars in terms of their proposals and things like that. I think that there has to be much more of a focus on the economy and on education. The two of them are linked. Someone who graduates from college will earn $1 billion more in her lifetime than someone who does not. And yet, access to education has shrunk, literally shrunk. The summer Pell Grant no longer exists. Pell is at $5,500, but if certain people are elected, they've already said they want to go through and cut some of these entitlement programs. HBCUs have $85 million in the next, 5 years coming from an Obama initiative. We need that money. We absolutely need that money.
I want to thank Dr. Gaines for pointing out something that I don't know how it got lost. My generation is raised to believe that Jews hate black people and black people hate Jews. One of the easiest ways economically, as Dr. Malveaux is saying, is a twofold approach that we can do to change our economic position in America. And both of them actually come from something they do already as a culture for the preservation of their race. If you are a black business owner, and I'm speaking to you as a board member of the Greater Baltimore Black Chamber of Commerce, please understand that the standard of business is money. Green. There is no such thing, and that's the one thing I cringed at every time I read the Declaration, white capitalism. Supply and demand, quality of product is what dictates the success of your business. So please understand you are a business owner, you are a business with a black proprietor, and there is no such thing as black business. As soon as we dispel that myth, number one, will we be further. Number two, we have to support then the businesses that we know have black proprietorship. I know Jewish friends that will drive across town. They don't complain about the inconvenience, because at the end of the day, they know they're spending their money where their people will be. And we have to overcome not wanting to walk the extra 2 blocks and shopping at the Chinese corner store because Mama's black-owned corner store is a little bit further from my house. And girl, you know I was tired today. We do those two things. We run our businesses like we understand that money is green and don't nobody care who made it at the end of the day. If you're going to spend it on them and go out of our way, inconvenient or not, then support those businesses.
Our final comment from the audience.
You know, whatever is going to happen to or for us is going to be political, or flow from politics. And if we understand politics is sort of the process that describes who gets what from who for who. And if we ain't organized and mobilized to impact on that,
I mean, we can meet forever and do nothing. I think what Gary did was talk folks or encourage folks how to mobilize. And 30 years, or whatever the number of years was not a long time to go from nothing to a president. The thing is, our hopes and dreams were so tied up in that we expected much more out of him as opposed to the process. Second term is when the gates are open up, because our interests and concerns are aligned with other people's needs and concerns, so it ought not be too bad to develop an economic program that lifts us out of this incredible level of unemployment. And you can tell a minimum wage neighborhood when you drive by it. I mean, you don't have to stop and ask them about it. We ought to be able to deal with these things. Plus, as the young lady here said, we really ought to acknowledge when the president did something. Even some of us are concerned about what they call Obamacare. Bear in mind, you know, at the time this thing came down, 46 million people had no insurance that you paid for. I mean, people now go to the best care and the most expensive kind of health care. And that's with a cough, you go to the emergency room. I mean, the money that our communities will realize is substantial. We've got to fight for infrastructure, which is going to be the type of work that puts our communities to work. We got to understand our relationship with organized labor. I mean, we got to get off this thing. Well, 45 years ago, the union didn't help my uncle get a job. It may well be true. That got nothing to do with today. If we don't understand how it works, we're going to get left out of a lot of stuff that has to come down the track.
Thank you. Final comment?
I have a question and a comment. One is, what on the agenda, my name is Denise Jenkins, stand up for democracy in DC Coalition, 3D63 statehood. And what on the agenda was left over, not done, that needs to be addressed now. And I was told that statehood was a part of the agenda.
Very much so.
And you are right here in the nation's capital, right in the center of the belly of the beast of what's supposed to be democracy throughout the world. And it is still needs to be addressed, it still needs to be resolved. So it's what needs to be addressed and put statehood back on the black agenda.
It was on the agenda. I have a copy of the document.
Thank you.
Let me add one other thing on the economic piece. The 99% movement includes us. Now, whether or not we want to see all them white folks out there and process that, this is the first time in my recall that the economic control of this country is being challenged on the streets. That 99% conversation out there, and they can call it class warfare, all it is. It is. And it is identifying the class who controls this economy and who controls this country. We need to be more actively engaged in understanding that conversation and its potential impact in the black community.
And I just wanted to close out the panel discussion with a quote from Harriet Tubman, conductor of the Underground Railroad. She said, "I freed 1,000 slaves. I could have freed 1,000 more if only they knew they were slaves."
That's right. Let's give it up. Let's give it up. Let's give it up for Brian. Let me just say as we conclude, because I yielded my time at the beginning because I wanted to be sure that Dr. Ife Williams could go and attend to the crisis. But let me just say, make a few comments. Let's hope that they're cogent. Number one of the reasons why I really wanted to do this, and much of what I've tried to do over the life of my activism, I now call it, I guess at one point said the autumn, now it's the winter of my activism. Let me first recognize Kareem Aziz. Kareem Aziz is at Sojourner Douglas College in Baltimore. He came over to be a part of this discussion today. And I acknowledge him because we had two State of the Race conferences there, 1994 and 1997. and are going to have a major town hall meeting on the war on drugs. So Kareem, thanks for coming. Let's give us a we wanted to convene this panel, and Reverend Yearwood could not come, and I was upset about that because I wanted to have more than one younger leader on the panel. And of course, he said that Catalina could more than represent him, and that was true. Because we really do need to understand this history, to know this history. There are literally millions of people of African descent who don't even know the Gary Convention happened. And this is particularly important for young people. Gary was very crucial for me because as a young activist coming out of Youngstown, Ohio, and Sister Kanaya is right, shaping up the background. Some people have already talked about it. 1964, 1963, of course, the March on Washington. 64, the Civil Rights Act that was passed as a result of the March on Washington. Actually, 1965 is Selma and the Voting Rights Act. 1968, significant for lots of reasons, not the least of which is that Dr. Martin Luther King is assassinated. But also in 1968, we have the election of the two first black mayors of major cities. Carl B. Stokes from Cleveland, Ohio. The other is one of the most brilliant mayors we ever produced, Richard Gordon Hatcher out of Gary, Indiana, small steel town. The other thing we should be aware of that out of the civil rights upheaval in 1964, 1965, people remember this country exploded with its rebellions. Exploded with rebellion. It's almost as if, all right, we had all these civil rights marches and so forth and so on, but people in Watts, Detroit, all across this country were saying, well, you may have the civil rights thing, but our lives have not changed. And the northern urban ghettos erupted, and they erupted around a slogan called Black Power. Black Power burst on the scene, and with Black Power came a new consciousness of our international roots was being talked about, really aligned with Malcolm. And indeed, in this tension, in this period, this brief period, those of you who want to recall it, it was internal warfare in the black community. Because we Young Turks was talking about Roy Wilkins' mama. He was talking about Whitney Young, his handkerchief head, Negro leaders. I mean, it was like rough. Because we were these young radicals coming onto the scene. They were integrationists. We were black nationalists. We were black nationalists. And we were coming with a whole new tune. And that black nationalism really began to spread. People, all them afros you saw, all them, them big bad. I mean, I used to have one. Black is beautiful. Black consciousness. A whole new affirmation of who was. That came out of the Black Power, Black nationalist movement. Imam Uri Baraka was one of the key forces behind that movement. But the point I want to make is you have all this chemistry boiling up. And what was significant about 1970, in Atlanta, Georgia, one of the most significant meetings that we held was the Congress of African People, convened by Imam Uri Baraka. But here's what was significant about it. It was like a truce, Bill Lucy. Because instead of us now cutting each other up as we had done, and it was vicious. I mean, we didn't have no love for what we called him handkerchief head, Uncle Tom. I mean, we was on that case. But in 1970, in Atlanta, Georgia, one of the colleges, Morris Brown University, or college, whatever it was, everybody gathered there from Minister Farrakhan, who is now just emerging. People don't remember. He was then called Halim Abdul Farrakhan. I remember. It's now just Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. He was the fiery new successor, senior of Malcolm X. Owusu Sadoka, whom you saw in the movie, who was the spearhead behind African Liberation Day. Because quiet as it's kept, 1972 was the high watermark of black nationalism in these United States of America. Because there were two salient events. The Gary Convention, and right out of there, it was adopted in May 25th, 1972 was the first African Liberation Day. Right? The first African Liberation Day. But in 1970, at Morristown University, everybody from Farrakhan to Owusu Sudoku and all of us radicals and Whitney Young and more moderates came together. Whitney Young was at the Congress of African People. So all of a sudden it was that unity without unity. We had kind of a truce. We said we can't all get along. We have to figure a way to get it done. I will never forget Lerone Bennett Jr. I was like, because Lerone would be there, and I was sitting there, he said, man, this is amazing. Look what's happening. That all these black leaders are coming together. You could not have had Gary without the Congress of African People in 1970. And I don't know who made the call. It may well have been Baraka who called Diggs and who called Hatcher to get it done. But you had these three leaders who then became the co-conveners of the Gary Convention. Now here's what was significant about that. In previous gatherings, nationalists would have been left out. It would just been the establishment organizations. But Baraka insisted that there would be a formula. Every congressional district in every state had to have an elected official, and at least one activist or nationalist had to be in the mix. That's how I came to be the co-convener of the Ohio delegation. Otherwise, we'd have been left out. The Pan-Africans had to be included in the formula. So in Ohio, it was Carl Stokes. Carl Stokes is the first mayor. He deferred to his brother, Louis B. Stokes, and a political operative who was a veritable genius, who you would remember, Kareem, from Dayton, Ohio, named C.J. McGlynn. Frank Fiona, director. He was a traditional machine politician, but he was one hell of a politician. I mean, he knew how to get it done. And he was, I mean, he was, I wouldn't say progressive in that sense, but he was for our people. But he was the old-fashioned machine, get it done. So here fans meet in the middle of that mix. And we organized our delegations all across this country. Phenomenal process where we got together, we debated, we argued, we discussed, and we pulled together these delegations, and we went off to Gary 10,000 strong because we elected 4,000 delegates and 4,000 alternates, and another couple thousand people just showed up. You couldn't get a hotel within 30 miles of Gary. That's how strong this was. Now, the Gary Convention, you know, in its assessment, there are many, many things that could be assessed by it. First of all, there's a lot of posturing going on. Because quite frankly, unbeknownst to some of us, the 1972 Democratic Convention has come up, so people are, you know, in some ways are being, you know, they talking smack. We're going to form a party, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. We were serious about a party. But when the party resolution hit the floor, I mean, that's another thing that got, and people got nervous, and Mtebisi St. Julian from Louisiana raised a resolution for an independent black political party. We compromised and said, okay, we want to have a party, we'll create something called the National Black Political Assembly. Now, the truth is important, some of us didn't like this, WL, but right after the convention, people took the agenda, which we did not ask them to do, and they were not authorized to do, they went off to the Democratic National Convention and presented it at the convention, which was some of their intent in the first place, which is okay. You know, in one way it's okay, but they really broke the process. And frankly, after Gary, it was really only Hatcher, our sister from Oklahoma, I'm blanking on her name, Secretary of State, there, only a few elected, Hannah Atkins, asked to remain with the process. But here is what was incredibly important about it, that Sister Catalina's and others talking about. What we established at Gary, more than anything else, was the idea that black people ought to have a black political agenda, and that we can come together in a process, political process, and in fact, ratify a black political agenda. And that candidates, be they Democrats, Republicans, Socialists, Communists, Independents, whatever, ought to be elected on the basis, not a party, but on the basis of the political agenda. And it was, and by the way, this political agenda, this agenda here is not, I'm going to be clear, this is not a right-wing conservative agenda. This is a forward-looking progressive agenda. I have to say that because some people have the notion that just saying independent is not enough. That's me saying it. The question is, where do you side on, where are you on the political spectrum? Because this agenda, when you read it, talks about the whole question of racism and capitalism. The need to deal with that. The whole question of beginning to create a new society. The whole concept of social transformation. This is not a conservative document. It is a radical document. And so to the degree that we want to flirt with Republicans, and that's fine, we have to understand the question is not whether you're Republican or Democrat, because if you go back to the era of the passage of the Civil Rights Bill, you had most Democrats in the South were opposed to it. But it would not have passed had there not been some Republicans up north, to the state places like New Jersey, New York, and so forth, even Everett Dirksen from Illinois, who were for it. That was because in those days, you had, in the Republican Party, you had some liberals and you had some moderates. I could reel them off by one. Jackie Robinson was a Republican. He was a rock because Nelson Rockefeller, and he had some other things on this, but he was a liberal. John Lindsay was a liberal. You know, Case, I mean, you could go down the line. You don't have that today. And the point I'm stressing is that we have to make up our minds as black people where we stand on the political spectrum. So, two things as I close. One, we came out of there with the idea that we ought to have a political process. And we ought to have black agendas. And for years, we actually met. We continued to meet and try to develop these local processes. And we would have meetings, and the candidates would have to come, no matter what they'd have to say, well, where do you stand on these issues? And we would be for them, against them, based on the agenda. We don't do that anymore. We have lost this process. And the question is not, should we do another Gary, but the question is, can we resurrect the process? Now, a logical extension of that one level is, you know, yeah, it's okay for people to self-announce and self-appoint themselves, so forth and so on, but frankly, I don't like the phenomenon of the pop-up Negro. We have somebody, and I'm not speaking negatively about him because I think he's turned out to be a relatively progressive congressperson from Memphis, Tennessee, Mr. Coleman. But we lost that seat because we had we had pop-up Negroes all decided that they wanted to lay claim to a seat. There was no process to decide, okay, which of these candidates is the best person to run from the seat. That's political process. The absence of that is political chaos. We almost lost the seat, the Shirley Chisholm seat, with Yvette Clarke recently. She came through it, but instead of people coming together to say, let's have a process to decide how we're going to deal with this, we had black people all jumping in and people endorsing. And meanwhile, we had a couple of white candidates who almost won that seat because we didn't have political process. Net gain of Gary was that, as Jesse said and others have said, maybe we had 2,000 elected officials when we left Gary. Within a decade, we had more than 10,000 black elected officials. It had that impact. It had that consequence. And that ferment would not have been possible really but without black consciousness. If in fact, as Jesse said, we didn't have no egos, we had an ego because we had developed a sense of our black consciousness. We would not have voted for black people earlier because we wouldn't have trusted black people. But all of a sudden, it was about black people. It was about forming the Coalition of Black Trade Unions. It was about forming the National Caucus of Black State Legislators. It was about forming the Black Psychologists. All that period of these black organizations coming out with really a very radical position was coming out of that era. Now, as I close, let me just say this. That the question is, I still think, is a third force in American politics. That is to say, we don't, and frankly, that's what the Rainbow Coalition could have been. I won't comment too much on that, but that's what the Rainbow Coalition could have been and should have been. You know, like Bill Lucy is saying, the Democratic Party, black people are Democratic for a reason. Black people are largely Democratic for a reason. Now, you know, I ran the president as an independent candidate. I've devoted much of my life, along with Ron Walters, it was independent black politics. But when you look at the choices, you know, I mean, we're not going to jump out of the frying pan into the fire, particularly now. I can't imagine which Republican we might even think about supporting. Olympia Snowe ain't in our district. Susan Collins ain't in our district. Lugar, you can name the Republicans who are because it's not about Democratic or Republican, it's about ideology. It's about who has the most liberating progressive view, unless you really do want to be a black conservative. And we see what that will do to you because we got one sitting on the Supreme Court of the United States.
Thank you.
Broke our backs. The idea that a black man Supreme Court of the United States has done more damage.
That's right.
The advancement of black interests than, than one might have, because it's about ideology. It ain't just about their skin color. It would have been better to have a white progressive on the court than a black conservative who's about bringing it. Big difference between Thurgood Marshall and ideology. And so we need a third force. We need a third force in American politics. I'll continue to write about that. And I think after we get past this election, because I think we do need to get past this election,
We will.
we got issues. We have issues. The fact that we have a black family in the White House and an African American in the White House does not dismiss the fact that we have tremendous issues in terms of the tremendous economic deterioration in our inner city community. And it cannot be addressed because the conservatives, their philosophy is triumph. We're not allowed to talk about race. That's the reason why Obama is very skittish about it, because if he says something, then all of a sudden he'll be labeled. But after this turn, I mean, we got to be on the defensive. We got to be back on the defensive. Because there are too many black people living in a state of emergency in black America. Too many people are in pain. Too many people are hurting. We have been too long neglected. There's not been an urban policy for nearly 30 years. Key concepts about things like the CETA program. When we were young revolutionaries, we had CETA, the Comprehensive Training and Employment Act. Poverty program, Model Cities program, Joint Partnership Training Act. We were dismissing it. What is that? Reform stuff. I mean, this ain't revolutionary. Today, we wish we had these programs. Because we have nothing to address in terms of work. Work has disappeared. Economic development has disappeared in our community. I close on this note. We have the Shirley Chisholm Presidential Accountability Commission. We raised that up for this reason, so there can be a notion of political process in the black community. What that commission does is to assess Obama and whomever. We didn't create it for Obama. Any president, now henceforth and forevermore, we can comment on where do you stand on the black agenda. There is one. There is one. There's a composite understanding of issues. If you look at it, there are all kinds of, between the NACP, the Urban League, Rainbow Push, MAN, if you look at it, there's not much difference. You can come up with a fairly good consensus on a range of issues that people agree on in terms of how we should be moving forward. One example is targeting. Every one of the organizations believes we have economic targeting. That in fact, the highest unemployment rate is in our community, New York City. 50% of young black men under the ages of 30 are unemployed. That is a state of emergency. And then we can't target jobs for these young brothers and sisters. So the Shirley Chisholm Presidential Accountability Commission looks at those kinds of issues and addresses them. Finally, we will have a State of the Black World Conference. By we, I mean Institute of the Black World 21st Century, right here in Washington, D.C., after the election. We do it after the election because we're not making any pretense that we can impact the election. But we sure want to be talking about how to mobilize and organize black people to address this state of emergency after the convention. The theme is State of Emergency in Black America, time to heal our families and communities. We're going to gather here in Howard University and dedicate it to the memory of Ron Walters to talk about how we put together a declaration of intent to heal black families and black communities. It won't be Gary, but it will be an opportunity for all of us to come together by areas and to discuss and to look at best practices, because that's what we need today. We got black people scattered all over the place. People who are working on, we in the Institute of the Black World 21st Century, we don't do voter registration. Why? Because that's what the National Coalition of Black Civic Participation does. And there may be 2 or 3 other organizations. Why would we duplicate that effort rather than joining that effort and making that effort stronger? That's what Melanie Campbell does. I mean, we talk about economic development, that's what Claude Anderson and George Fraser, and then there are any number of people who do that. So we're not going to launch a new economic development program. We need to learn how to cluster around the work that is being done, cross-fertilize, strengthen it, and move forward, learning from each other. That doesn't require charismatic leaders. That doesn't require somebody to make long speech like I just made today and all that kind of stuff. It just requires us to collaborate with each other. So I close by saying thank you so much for joining us today. You say it's the quality, not the quantity, we run that out there, But we will be reproducing this. This will be on the IBW website. We have broadcast across the country that we did this. So hopefully people will get a chance to see it. And maybe we'll also be able to do this in other venues and other places all across the country as well. So Bernie?
I want to applaud this brother here and his beautiful family. You need to write a book. I don't know how you do that, but applaud yourself for taking the time out to be here today to give this presentation.
And once again, those of you who can check us out, we're at the Institute of the 21st Century. Our website is www.idw21.org, www.idw21.org. We look forward to continuing to engage you, and we will look forward to seeing everybody in November for the State of the Black World Conference. And in Washington, D.C., Pittsburgh, and Baltimore, also in May, as we do major town hall meetings to end the destructive war on drugs. Give yourself a big round of applause.
Christ love you.